The year is 2055. Time travel has become a feasible reality. Time Safari Inc. will take you wherever you want to go. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we'll find out soon as we talk about Ray Bradbury's classic short story, A Sound of Thunder. My guest today is Josh from the Sci-Fi Bookery, and we're here talking about Ray Bradbury and his classic, near perfect short story, A Sound of Thunder. That's our short story of this month, and hopefully you've read it. We will get into spoilers in a little bit, but the first part, we'll keep it spoiler free for now. But Josh, thanks for jumping on with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Art.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, he runs the Sci-Fi Bookery YouTube channel, and I think you're relatively new at that channel, aren't you?
Yeah, just it's only been a couple months doing this. I've had lots of other YouTube channels. I've been doing YouTube pretty much since the beginning.
Mm.
Relatively unsuccessfully, of course. But but yeah, at least since the beginning when YouTube started, I've been on it. Always interested in video and that kind of thing. But yeah, this channel, it's been 2 months. I just I don't have a lot of people to talk to about books. So I usually read a book and then look up something on YouTube and see it. And I've been having conversation with people. And I was like, I should just get a channel going. I have enough channels already. Might as well just use some of my time doing this too. So
I think most of us that have started booktube channels do it because I need to talk to somebody about this book.
exactly. And that's what it is. And that's the other cool thing about Instagram too. I'm on Instagram, Sci-Fi Bookery,
Mm.
and I know you are too. And it's nice to because you can just put up a picture and somebody can start a conversation. And I've done that numerous times. Feel like, oh, I loved that book. This was my favorite part or whatever. And you can talk to people. And I love that about this YouTube and Instagram community that books have created because you don't get that. I mean, outside, if you have somebody in your family that you can talk to, which I don't, nobody's really
Mhm.
into, reading, especially not reading sci-fi like I am. So, yeah, it is nice to have people like you to talk
Mhm.
to about this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and I did a buddy read in October of wow. Something Wicked This Way Comes. There you go.
Yeah.
By Bradbury. And
Hmm.
I have loved that part of being on YouTube, just doing like buddy reads with people because I've read that book 3 or 4 times, and somehow just talking about it with people who loved it and were reading it for the first time, it just
Hmm.
really opened that book up for me.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, just being able to discuss it with somebody else and they see something you didn't, you see something they didn't, because books are like that. They're transcendent. I mean, it means something different to everybody. And although the themes might be the same and everybody picks up on them, they affect you differently.
Mm.
So that's a really cool thing about books, and that's what's great about stories, especially like this.
And what caught my attention about your channel was I think it was maybe the second video you had one up of Fahrenheit 451,
Hmm.
and I think it was in that one you said that that should be required reading for everyone.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. And I know it's a lot of high schools have it as required reading, but a lot of them are, in today's political climate, they're kind of drawing back on it and hiding it a little bit more because it is such a revolutionary book even today, as much as it was then. And I think it should be required reading because it's especially good for right now because it doesn't just deal with banning books. It has nothing to do actually with banning books, which a lot of people think, and every high school English teacher is going to tell you it has to do with banning books, but it really is about society pulling away from reading and not
Mm.
wanting that information and wanting to get the information from TV and radio and any other media source except a book. So it's more about education steering away from, or humanity steering away from education as opposed to being force-fed information, which is exactly where we are today with
Mm.
social media and the 24-hour news cycle and all that stuff. You're just force-fed all the information that they want you to have instead of going out and actually looking for it yourself. And it the whole story is about how books open your mind.
Hmm.
and make you a free thinker and make you go out and find your own information. And I think that's why it should be required reading. And knowing that is now I understand why it's not required reading because they want, I mean, that's kind
Right.
of part of what school is they want you to think this thing that they want you to think.
Mm.
And that book really is completely counterculture to where we are right now.
Yeah. I am amazed every time I read it. It just seems like it's becoming more and more true, which is
Yeah.
sad. But
Yeah, I know.
yeah, well, that's. I mean, I don't know if you know a lot about Bradbury's life, but he was passionate about libraries, and
Mhm.
he said he didn't want a college education. He went to the library and looked and found the information he wanted to know. Uh, Kind of with what you were saying, that tracks with what I know about him.
Yeah, and now it's even more you can do that online too. I mean, with this, I mean, that was back before
Hmm.
the internet. And I mean, he predicted the internet, he predicted social media,
Hmm.
predicted all this stuff just in that one book. Let alone all of the other things that he predicted throughout his life and all of his other books. But now, I mean, you literally can get an education. If there's anything that I want to know, I look it up online. I mean, and that's a good thing because the information's there, but it's a bad thing because we're sort of neglecting the previous generation's knowledge that they gained through hard work and through making mistakes, and we just look it up on YouTube and somebody else tells us how to do it. So
Hmm.
it's it's a good thing and a bad thing, but Bradbury predicted both the good and the bad of that in
Hmm.
Fahrenheit 451 and throughout a bunch of his other books actually.
Hmm. This video could quickly turn into like a 5 hour
Let's do
love
5 hours.
fest.
I got
Yeah.
nothing but time,
Okay,
man.
awesome. I was gonna ask what's your I'll have you share just your history with Ray Bradbury. When did you first start reading him?
Yeah.
Things like
I
that.
um I kind of got it. I was introduced because I had an English teacher in high school who was amazing. Still to this day, best teacher I've ever had.
Mm.
Him and I had this connection through reading and through writing too. He was probably in his mid 70s and still teaching. And we just connected on that kind of level. Like we were just kind of, you know,
Mm.
old souls or something. But he introduced me to Bradbury. He was a big Bradbury fan. So in one of the creative writing classes, we read Dandelion Wine and
Mhm.
some of his short stories like All Summer in a Day and stuff like that. And then that's where I was introduced to Fahrenheit 451, which became one of my all-time favorites. And we read this one right here, Sound of Thunder.
Mhm.
I think we read October Country, but it might have been the following year because I had him 2 years in a row. Somehow that miraculously worked out. But yeah, he was a huge fan. So it opened my eyes to a different kind of science fiction that I wasn't used to. I was used to like I was a huge Star Wars nerd growing up.
Mhm.
Anything I would like I got here's my tea
Yep.
and my water is like I Darth Vader's my favorite. But yeah, so I was a huge Star Wars fan growing up. And so I was into Star Wars and then I was reading like anything about space comic books. I'm big into comic books and I love space comic books specifically. So all that stuff. But then to read something like Bradbury wrote, the way he wrote science fiction, it was like, this is not anything like I've seen before. And
Mhm.
then reading some of his non-science fiction novels too, it was like, wow, this dude he's diverse. Like he's seen life. Like you could tell that he's seen life and he writes about it. So that opened my eyes to a whole new thing and threw me into an entirely different lifestyle that now I'm just in the thralls of every day. And I'm
Yeah.
here talking on YouTube about it. So obviously something like that worked. But that was sort of where I got introduced to Bradbury. And then it was just sort of like a lifetime of, oh, here's another one. Oh, here's another one.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's just kind of a trail then.
Mm. Yeah, I think like many, I first read Bradbury as a teenager. I was a big Star Wars fan, and I back in the day, kids. I mean, we only had the first three films. That was it. I
Hmm.
mean, it
That
was
was Star Wars.
that
Yeah.
was the Dark Ages. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, and I really wanted to read more science fiction, and I know I had read some like young adult kind of science fiction,
Hmm.
but I don't know. I was. in a also kind of in a teenage emotions running high and rough life happening at the time and all that.
Hmm.
And I saw a copy of the Martian Chronicles at our local library, and I thought that sounds familiar. I don't know why. Something about the cover with the rockets.
Hmm.
I just I'm going to try this. I think this is a classic. I'm going to pick it up and try it. And I just fell in love with that story, with that novel or short story collection, however you want to
Hmm.
define it. Um, but
Roughly connected short story.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It sometimes I joke it's the lazy man's novel,
Yeah,
but
it's just I'll write a bunch of short stories. Yeah, I guess they're together. Yeah,
yeah,
it's all Mars, right?
right. But it's just a powerful stories and something about his writing style, his
Mhm.
imagination. It just gripped me. And then fortunately, I had some great librarians in my life that said, "Well, if you like this, then you
That
should
makes a
read."
huge
Yeah,
difference. Yeah, having a good librarian that'll kind of walk you through it, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Good library system, and really helped me, get through some rough times in my life. So then I know it was shortly after I read the Martian Chronicles, then I was reading some of his short stories, and A Sound of Thunder was one of the ones I read near the beginning, and this was the story that I think was like the final nail in the coffin that I am going to live, breathe, and die Ray Bradbury here.
Yeah,
It was such a marvelous story that the ending kind of left me like, whoa, what just happened? So,
it's it's great because it's such a quintessential story within the realm of science fiction. It really is. It's kind of like that, like a linchpin story. So there's certain it's like if you look through history, there's certain times that changed history. This story was one of those stories that changed the trajectory of the way that stories were told.
mm,
So it was a common theme already. I mean, going back to like when was it? Early 1800s, I think was it was the first writings about the butterfly effect,
mhm,
which is a common theme throughout this entire story and throughout a lot of writing in this time. But then this story hit and it was like, oh, like literally a butterfly story, like a butterfly effect. And um I'm trying hard not to do spoilers yet, Art. But but that was this was like the linchpin story here that sort of propelled every other story with this theme from then on referenced this story.
mhm,
It was hard not to somehow reference something in the story because it had it all. And it was so short, such a short story, but it packed every single aspect of time travel, butterfly effect, changing in people, the way people change based on different things, not just throughout history and time space continuum, but just personality change based on the way that you act, the way they react to you. Like it was just such a beautifully written personal story that there's no way that somebody else can write something with the same theme and not draw reference to this.
mm, mhm.
And that was as best as I could put that without spoilers.
Okay. Well done. Yeah. Um, well, we'll get into spoilers here in a minute. But now you first read the story in school. You said that
Yeah.
was required. What grade were you in? Did you
Well, it
remember?
was high school, so
Okay.
it might have been junior year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter is in eighth grade, and she had her English teacher had them read this story in eighth grade, and I thought
Nice. Yeah, that's
like, what? Wow, good for
my
her.
daughter just read All Summer in a Day
Yeah.
in school, and I'm like, that was awesome. I'm like, I'm going to talk to somebody about Ray Bradbury tomorrow. I think that's
Yeah.
really cool. But it's great that these teachers see the beauty in this because a lot of teachers they're like, it's all about the modern books, and because kids can't relate to this kind of stuff, but it's like it's classic for a reason, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other story she read, in fact, was All Summer in a Day. That's the one that takes place on Venus, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
it's like raining glass or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, it's yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I shared this in a actually in a video a couple weeks ago now. But the teacher had them write an ending to the story or a sequel to the story of All Summer in a Day, and
Oh, that's cool.
I I was surprised my daughter was sharing some of the stories that her friends wrote, just kind of summarizing them, and they had such a visceral, angry response to that story that it was fresh and relevant to them, and they were mad about it. That this poor
Yeah.
girl got locked up in a closet, and
But it's great because it means that
yeah,
they really connected to it, which was the point of the story.
yeah,
You know, like
yeah.
Ray Bradbury he had such a personalized way of telling a story to where you related to these characters. I mean, I can't tell you how many books I've read where I'm like, I don't care at all about that character. It means nothing to me. I hope they die. Like,
Mhm,
it doesn't matter. But like, Bradbury had a way to even make the villains relatable, to
mhm.
make like every character you feel for them. And that's
Yeah.
why you can take eighth grade kids and give them this story and they just go off on it because it's relatable.
Mhm. Yeah. She said her teacher said some of them uh, her the teacher's response to a couple of the stories were that she said, "I'm starting to worry about you guys. Are you okay?"
Well, maybe you shouldn't have given them the story, man.
Yeah. But at our parent teacher conference, I said, I just want to thank you for introducing them to Ray Bradbury. That he's my favorite author, and he's one of hers as well, and we kind of bonded over that. So that was pretty fun.
It's great, man.
Yeah. Um, all right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the story, and we'll just go ahead and say if you haven't read it by now, you need to read it so we can talk openly about
Oh
it.
yeah, it's
Uh,
spoiler time.
it's spoiler time, right? So if you get spoiled after this point, then it's your fault. So, all right. So basically, the story is a pretty straightforward one. It's the year 2055, I believe, and time travel has not only become a reality; it's almost like a vacation destination. And a company called Time Safari Inc. Or Incorporated, I guess, will take you to safaris to any year in the past. You name the animal, we take you there. You shoot it. You know, pretty straightforward. So we are introduced to a man named Eccles, who this near the beginning. I don't know, something about this description of him. I'll just read this little quote. It says warm phlegm gathered in Eccles's throat. He swallowed and pushed it down. The muscles around his mouth formed a smile as he put his hand slowly out upon the air, and in that hand waved a check for $10,000 to the man behind the desk. And then he says, "Does this safari guarantee I come back alive?" And he said, "We guarantee nothing."
Guarantee nothing.
Yes, but something about just that opening line, I'm already
Hmm.
beginning to think Eccles is maybe a bit unstable.
Yep.
I don't think he's ready for it.
Yeah, that description was so perfect because the way he talks about like his the way he swallows.
Hmm.
Like we've all been in that situation. So like you can take that, you can actually apply that to a situation where you were nervous, where you were going into something that you weren't completely sure of, and there were no reassurances from the people that you were going with, and immediately you relate to the character. And that's what I mean. Like this is like literally what the second sentence of the
Yeah,
story, and you immediately relate to him. So yeah, that's so good. It's so good right off the bat.
right. And so essentially, let's see, what's the other guy's name? Mr. Travis. Uh, they go back in time because he wants to hunt a T Rex. This is like the epitome of, I don't know. Um,
This is
what,
big, big game.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean,
this is the trophy. Yeah.
yeah. You shoot a T Rex. What else is there to hunt?
Hmm.
Now, I'm pretty sure I read this story right around the time Jurassic Park came out.
Oh, perfect.
So to me, Jurassic Park at that time was like the scariest movie I've ever seen.
Hmm.
And then I read this story when so they go back in time to to the hunt. I should say at the beginning they make a mention about a an election that happened, and the good guy won, and
Yeah.
um, all that. So and then when the T-Rex shows up and they go back in time, he explains the rules, gets all that exposition out of the way, which even in that, I was just reminded again today as I was rereading it that like this is interesting,
Yeah. Yeah. That whole concept of the way that they go about it, and they choose the exact time and place that the animal was going to die of natural causes
Mhm.
purposely. They don't say what the reason is there, but you realize then at the end it's because they know about the butterfly effect, and they
Mhm.
know about the time space continuum and the disruption that it causes. So they try to subvert that by going through this whole lecture of, well, don't touch anything, and we got to kill the animal exactly at the second that it died of natural causes, and all this stuff. So they knew about it, and they're doing it anyways.
Yeah. Uh, and I can't help but keep drawing parallels to Jurassic Park. I think that same idea is at work here, that
Hmm.
we're gonna kind of play God almost,
Yeah.
and see what we can get away with.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think on our Discord channel, somebody had mentioned if he wondered if, or they wondered if Michael Crichton had been inspired by the story, but I think
Very
we
well could
found
have
it.
been.
I think she had found that he had said it was Arthur Conan Doyle's Lost
The
World.
Lost World.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. That makes
Uh,
sense.
but I,
Because then the sequel was The Lost World. So
right.
yeah, it makes sense.
Um, but this is one of those stories that I think probably is just in everyone's mind, and we just don't know it. That.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, this is such a, what I'm saying, like with Bradbury, the way he writes in such a naturalistic way that, like, this story is naturally with us.
Hmm.
We just don't know until we read it. And then you're like, oh yeah, I totally knew about all that stuff. I think about that. And it's funny the way that it's the way that he develops characters and the way that he writes them, and that all their flaws and weaknesses are always right out there in the open, at least to the reader, not necessarily to the other characters. But I think that that's one of those things, like you were saying, like this is a story that was always with us, just needed to read it at some point.
Right. And sometimes I can remember like my thoughts and feelings about the first time I've read something. Not with every book, but once in a while it happens. And this is one of those moments when I read this description of the T Rex. And it could be, I'd been influenced a bit by Jurassic Park, but the way he describes it here as it came on great, oiled, resilient, striding legs. It
Hmm.
towered 30 feet above half of the trees, a great evil god, folding its delicate watchmaker's claws close to its oily reptilian chest. And then it goes on. It's just kind of a longer paragraph describing it. But I I just remember like my jaw being open, like, wow, that
Yeah.
was a paragraph, and I'm scared.
It is just, it's so poetic the way that he describes the animal. Because the rest of it is like, okay, well, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And then he gets to the T-Rex. That's like the pinnacle of the story.
Yeah.
And he wants you to stay there. He wants you to be focused on it. And I loved the description of his scales like green coins.
Hmm.
Like, you know what that is. Like, even though you've never seen a green coin before, I mean, where are there green coins? But you know what that looks like automatically, and it doesn't need any more description, but it holds you there, and it holds you right in there. It holds you thinking, you're like, oh, so all these giant metallic green things coming down, and even like the arms, he describes the arms a couple times so that you focus right on that part. And that's what's so good about that description. And
Yeah.
he's got a couple other descriptions in here too that are close, and it's towards the end actually when he looks at his boot, but we'll get to that. But yeah, the description of the T-Rex was just beautiful.
So Eccles sees this dinosaur, and I think he finally comes to his senses, or maybe quickly leaves them. I don't know which. And he bolts. I mean, he panics. He, um, yeah, he just loses his mind. Um, all right, and then let's see. So they shoot the T Rex. I like after they after he's shot, it just I don't know, it's just so graphically described. And then
Yeah.
it says, the thunder faded, the jungle was silent, and after the avalanche, a green peace. Which again, poetic. That um,
Yeah.
the jungle is just rich and green, and I like that he brings the color of the scene in to that statement of
Yes.
peace. Yeah.
Because you can imagine a jungle at that time would be, it's untouched by man, you know? There's no pollution and no no
Mm,
smog or anything like that. Nobody's deforesting the whole place. It's just lush and green and untouched, and you can picture that in there. Um, I just wanted to touch on probably my favorite line from when the T-Rex dies is a windstorm from the beast's mouth engulfed them in the stench of slime and old blood.
mm,
And you can totally feel that.
mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was right before they shot it, like right when, and that's what kind of caused him to be like, no, I'm not doing this. And just that, I mean, that was before it died, and you could like the stench of slime and old blood, like it was eating something, and you kind of get the feeling that they're closer than you thought they were in there.
Mm-hmm.
Like they talk about like walking up to it and setting up and stuff, but you don't realize how close they can smell its breath from
Mm,
that distance. So that really puts the whole thing in perspective too, of what he's feeling, what Eccles feeling is like you can imagine. I mean, you could be standing 10 feet from this thing,
yeah.
looking up at it, and it's 30 feet above the trees. Like, you'd be freaking out.
Yeah. uh, it it's one of those descriptions that leaves me feeling kind of unsettled and almost just gross. Like something about this creature has just made me feel uh, just uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a T-Rex in a picture book. Like
Right.
this is, and that's the other thing too, is like without the time machine that these guys invented, that was the only thing people saw T-Rexes in pictures or like bones in a museum. But like to actually see it in person, this I would imagine would be the experience.
Yeah.
So nobody really knows what it was like, but I'd take this description and probably stay away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm beginning to wonder if Bradbury didn't have a time machine he was hiding. So
It is pretty accurate, it seems. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Um, well, that's what reading books will get you, kids. So,
Hmm. Yeah. An overactive imagination.
uh, just to kind of summarize a few things here quickly, they get Eccles, they retrieve the bullets. They Lesperance and Travis, they're angry at him. They're chewing him out, making threats. They get back in the time machine and come home. And at first, it just has the whole story is built up to this kind of this point now that where at least it's laid the seeds of it even near the beginning.
Hmm.
And when he gets there and they get out and they're like, is everything okay? And they're like, yeah, it's fine. Everything's fine. And then he begins to slowly reveal little changes here and there. There's the spelling is different. And then they find out that the wrong candidate won the presidential
Hmm.
election. And it was at that point I'm thinking, uh-oh,
Yeah.
what happened?
Well, it's funny because in your video leading like announcing the short story club, you had mentioned, well, we're in an election year and this is kind of,
Yeah.
it would work for that. And it's funny how close it is to it, you know?
Yeah. What I don't try to talk about politics too much,
Mhm.
but I remember in the 2016 election, people were getting online saying, "Okay, who stepped on the butterfly?"
Yeah,
And
that's what this is.
yeah,
And that's what I mean by, I mean, his work is transcendent,
yeah,
it's just, it fits with any time period. And maybe the writing style seems a little old at times,
hmm
but it still fits. Like it still fits. I mean, you could rewrite this in more modern language and it'd be perfect still.
hmm yeah, yeah. So they find out what happened, while they're trying to figure that out, and they realize that they look at Eccles' shoes, and here's kind of the plot twist, almost Twilight Zone-esque.
Hmm.
Um, there's a crushed butterfly on the bottom of Eccles' shoe, and he he's begging them to, can't we go back and fix it? Can't we change it? And then Travis gets his rifle, cocks it, and raises it, and then all it ends with is there was a sound of thunder. And
So good. So good.
yeah, and you're left like, oh, wait, what just happened?
It's a cliffhanger and a half, man.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
yeah. Now in your video, you've been doing short story Sundays
Hmm.
where you're and I'm gonna really enjoy the two you have so far.
Thank you.
Um, and you talked about that or this story in your recent one, and you didn't really go into detail because you didn't want to give spoilers. But
Right. I wanted to jump on with you before I
yeah,
screwed
well,
something up.
we are fully in the spoiler zone here.
Let's
So
do it.
I was going to ask if you could kind of expound on that thought from your video, that connection between this sound of thunder phrase that you
Yeah, of
find in the story.
course. So, what I kind of got into the spoiler-free part of it when I was talking in my video was about how a good story has a connection. I mean, it's what they teach you in elementary school, beginning, middle, and end. But there's always a connection with the beginning and the end, but it needs to be such a deep connection that people make it immediately. It can't be one of those things like I've read a lot of books where there's something there and I have to think about it and I'm like, wait, where did I see that before? Let me go back and, you should never have to turn back in a book to remember something. The writer should make you remember the things you're supposed to remember because it's not just telling a story, it's telling this story. So this story is called A Sound of Thunder. So you would expect thunder sounds. What's cool about the way that Bradbury used thunder is none of it is actual thunder. It's sort of the metaphor of thunder. So the first time that we hear the sound of thunder is in that jungle when the T-Rex is coming. And you can assume that it's a mixture of his roar, knocking down trees, whatever it be, the steps on the ground. That's the sound of thunder. And that's the thing that's kind of like the storm is coming, this ominous thing. The thunder comes first, then the lightning. And Eccles thinks that he's going to die right there and then. And that
Mhm.
sound of thunder is what, brings the storm of death to him. So that's the first time that we hear that or that we hear it described. And then at the end, when we can assume that his actual death was brought after the second sound of thunder from the gun, it was a funny tie-in because he thought he was going to die in that jungle, but it was the second sound of thunder that actually got him.
Mm.
And I loved that because we remembered the sound of thunder the first time because Bradbury described it so well and it sent chills down your spine so that by the time you got to the end, there was a sound of thunder. If you don't have goosebumps at that line
Mhm.
after that original part, and that's what I mean about writing purposely so that the reader remembers it. Like you remember that he said before, Sound of Thunder. He named the story A Sound of Thunder so that you would remember it. And that was the thing that tied it all together. And again, masterfully done.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, for those of you watching, and I know some of you have read this for the first time, um, for this read along. So, I'd love to hear from your comments and thoughts. Comment below, and I know Josh and I both would love to keep that conversation going for
Yeah, for
sure.
sure.
But yeah, I just remember finishing that story and just sitting there thinking about what did I just read?
Yeah.
How can stepping on a butterfly change everything? And then I put all the pieces together from all the little clues that Bradbury left throughout the story, and it was like, whoa, okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, like I think you mentioned, this whole generation of butterflies gets killed, or well, mice, I think was the illustration they used.
Mice it was, yeah.
And then, the foxes that ate the mice died, which wipes out that generation. And then it just is an ongoing domino effect of disaster. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just how it's funny how even sometimes a small little thing can have such a strong ripple effect. Uh,
And when you think about it, it's not just time travel. I mean, the butterfly effect happens in everyday life. You know, you make a decision and it changes the way that you do something else. Sometimes cautiously, you know, you make a
mhm,
decision in the past, you're like, well, I'm not going to make that mistake again. Or you change something and it changes the way that you live your life. So it's sort of an extreme description is the butterfly effect, but it's reality, you
mm,
know? Everything that you do has an effect in your life and it changes the way that you live. Um, there's another concept called the mini worlds, and I am actually reviewing a book for an upcoming video that deals with that, but it's a very similar thing where each decision that you make creates an alternate universe or an alternate world where that decision lives out, or the other decision lives out. So like you come here and you're like, well, I'm gonna walk the dog, or I'm gonna sit on the couch and read a book. Well, you choose to sit on the couch and read a book. Well, the other world that splits off from that, you walk the dog and get hit by a car, you know. And then this world, you read this book and you're like, well, I'm gonna put that down and have a cup of coffee. So you have a cup of coffee. Well, in the other one, you know, you finish the book and it changes your life in another way. Whereas in this one, you never finish the book and you have your cup of coffee instead, and then you go a different direction. And it says mini worlds theory, which plays into the butterfly effect too, because it's cause and effect with everything that you do, every little thing. And it comes under a microscope with the
mm,
butterfly effect because it literally is. He steps on a butterfly and changes the entire course of human history just with that one little thing.
mm. Yeah, kind of makes me afraid to ever leave the house, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm good right here. Yeah.
Unless staying in the house ruins everything, maybe I should go, you know.
See, that's the problem.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
problem with reading is that it makes you think too much.
Well, these days that's not such a bad problem, I
No,
guess.
no, no, no.
um, I don't know if you could think it in your own life that there's maybe been some butterfly effect moments. You know, I can think of a couple different times where it was even like podcasting. My wife years ago got started listening to podcasts, and she kept trying to get me to listen to a few, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not. I don't want to sit around listening to people talk. I mean, that sounds
Hmm.
boring, you know. But she kept. I think you'd really like it, and so finally, I said fine, and I listened to a couple. Like, well, I'm going to look for the kind I like to listen, to, you know. So I found some book related ones. I found some Christmas ones, and then I got hooked and addicted and got into some communities where you know
Hmm.
they would have uh, book clubs and then podcast about it, and all of that just finally has led to me actually starting a podcast and doing. And I don't know if any of that would have happened if my wife hadn't just said one day, "Hey, you should listen to a podcast. I think you'd
Yeah,
like it." Yeah.
you did. Yeah, I have a similar story with pretty much every ridiculous hobby that I get into
Uh huh.
because I have tons of them. I have one, I have a comic book group on Facebook, Make Comic Book Collecting Fun Again, it's called. And we have like something like 3,000 members in this group, but it all started with just my buddy and I we've always been into comic books growing up and everything like that. And we are like, hey, let's start something here because he was on Facebook and he's like, hey, there's like all this like community of like comic book people just like us. And I'm like, oh, cool. He's like, let's start one of those. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So now we have like 3,000 members. This is what, 4 years later, I think. And we have all these artists in the group and we make coloring books for children's hospitals, and we do all this like charitable stuff, community type of work and that kind of thing. And none of that would have come about if he wasn't just like, hey, let's start a Facebook group. Like I would have never thought to do something like that, but it just all snowballed. And you're right, like that was just me sitting there one day and I get a text from him and I'm like, yeah, sure, why not, let's do it. So
Yeah, and it just changes your life. But
exactly.
and you know, I'm not saying that you know our podcast will change the world, but it certainly has changed mine.
It does, though. It will change the world. You have to believe that.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I was talking, interviewing someone for my podcast this morning, and we were talking about how we both started podcasts during the pandemic because there was just so much negativity, we wanted to bring something cheerful, something
Mm-hmm.
positive,
Yeah.
even if it was just to a few people. That we needed it at that time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that was such an interesting time too, in this sort of a way where we could connect this way,
Hmm.
you know? And that's what I was telling you. I think it's probably part that you were going to cut out because the camera was shaking. But when I was telling you about the diecast racing stuff, that was something that I started during that time. And it was really just to keep people active and to keep them interested. And I was running like 4 or 5 races a day, just downstairs in my sweatpants, throwing some cars down the track just to keep people entertained. Because I've always been like an entertainer kind of person, trying to help people be happy and stuff like that. So that was
Hmm.
such an interesting time for things like that to come out, and for new hobbies to be created, and new lifestyles really to do that. Like this, like you were saying, you did all that and here you are. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if that
Hmm.
wasn't the case. So
Hmm.
it's like we meet all kinds of new people by doing the things that we do, and that's part of the butterfly effect too.
Hmm.
Like I would have never met you, would have never met most of these people. I mean, these people I talk to on YouTube and Instagram, they're amazing, just great people. And I would have never known that they existed
Hmm.
without that butterfly effect taking effect in my life.
Yeah, yeah. I um, was really reflecting on that. Some of the authors I've interviewed, I never would have heard of them.
Yeah.
I mean, because they're not the big name authors. They're not the
Hmm.
celebrity authors. I know they'd probably love to be someday, but they had such fascinating stories about their own life and
Yeah.
how they got there. And I just want to hear more from
That was
people like that.
something my grandma always said. She kind of got me into reading. She
Mm,
read like so much, like thousands of books in her
mm,
like she just read all the time. So she kind of got me into it, and she said that everyone has a story and everybody's story is different even if they're telling the same story.
mhm,
So like you could tell a story about a bird that's flying across the sky and it's going to be completely different than somebody standing right next to you watching that same bird. And that's what's great about these indie authors is they have a story to tell and it's different than anything else, even if it's a similar subject. Like we were talking about before with the people who, you know, very obviously use a Sound of Thunder as reference in their
mm,
stories, but it's totally different and it's unique and their own. And that's such a great thing with the indie authors that you interview is listening to them. They're so passionate about what they're writing
mhm,
and that's their story to tell. Like we all have a way of thinking. We all have stories in our head, and we're the only ones that can get them out.
mhm,
And that's what's great about putting a spotlight on those guys. Even if a couple people see it and buy their book, and that means that their story is out there. Then it's
mm,
part of the world. It's not just in their head anymore.
mhm.
So it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, definitely. Um, well, Josh, I guess any final thoughts on the story? I was
I
gonna
think
ask.
everybody needs to read this.
Yeah,
Everybody. If you haven't read it yet, I mean, it's available. You can just find a PDF here online.
yeah,
I mean, it's basically open source reading. You don't have to go find what. I don't even know what book it's collected in. I haven't seen one. I'm sure.
yeah.
I mean, it's one of his more popular short stories, so I'm sure it's in somewhere. But like, you can just find it online. Read it. Pirate this thing. Whatever you have to do, get this story in your head right away,
Yes.
and grab onto it and make it part of your daily life, part of the way that you live. Look at the things that you do and the changes that you make, based on this, because that's what stories are supposed to change us. They're written to change us. They're not just written for entertainment. And I think there's this, not to get off on this. Sorry, man, I'm
It's
a
fine.
talker. This is what I
Oh,
do.
that's
That's why
fine.
that's why a YouTube channel is the right thing for me.
That's right.
But the problem with a lot of modern literature is it's this Hallmark movie, that the Hallmark movie effect, I guess you could
Hmm.
call it, where it's like they're just trying to tell a story. It doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to mean anything. It doesn't have to change society or change the people who are reading it. It just has to be a story. And to me, that's no good. I want to be fundamentally changed and have my entire life disrupted after reading a book. Like that's what I want. And I don't just want to cry. I don't just want to read some sappy romance thing where, and there's no, if you want to read that stuff, that's great. This is just me personally. This is the way that I want to read. I want to read stuff that fundamentally changes the way I look at the world. Because to me, that's what writing is supposed to be. And that's what books are supposed to do. And that's why people rebel against them. And that's why in Fahrenheit 451, the people didn't want books anymore because they changed their life. There's so
Mm.
many points in that story, not to get off on a completely different book, but where they say, well, I don't want to cry. I don't want to feel things. The books make me feel things.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want them in society anymore because they made them feel things. Well, I want to feel things. Like that's what people are here to do. We're here to experience this life. And books help us to do that. So yeah, read that story now.
That's right.
Do it.
Read it again. And uh, I was talking to somebody. They said they hadn't read a lot of or any Ray Bradbury, but they were thinking of trying Fahrenheit 451. So I told
Do it,
them
man.
if you only read one of his books, read that
Yes,
one.
absolutely. That's the
Yeah,
one. That, like
yeah,
I said, that's essential reading right
yeah,
there.
absolutely. Well, Josh, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If anyone is interested in joining in for next month's discussion, we'd love to have you on. I'd love to have you on. I'm going to try to maybe just have a schedule of when I'm going to record, and I'll have one month maybe in the afternoon and another month in the evening, just for time zones.
Mm.
I know I've got some English or British readers as well, and which is neat to see. Bradbury is so American, but he's
Yeah,
beloved the
he's
world over. Yeah,
he's quick. I mean, he's America's writer. I mean,
yeah,
he's from the Midwest, and he's just so much. He writes about America.
mm,
But it just shows you how the writing. It doesn't matter what the subject is. It's the way that he writes that draws people in and makes it personal for them. So yeah, I mean, across the world, you can
mm.
find people that connect with these stories.
And then for December, the story I think we'll read is one of his another classic Bradbury story, and it's called "The Homecoming." Uh,
Nice.
and I thought because it'll be Christmas, people will be coming home for celebrations, and that story kind of has that idea.
Mm.
But if you haven't read it, just if imagine the Adams family in the hands of Ray Bradbury, and it and that story has I think kind of an interesting story behind it as to how it came to be written and everything. So I'll share some of that in the next video next month.
Nice.
Um, well, I've got to go and see if I can get this edited tonight so it can be out tomorrow. But
Good luck with that, because
yeah.
man, this was rough.
So the editing might not be as slick as I'd like, but we'll
Yeah.
make it work. That's all right.
It's good.
It's been a crazy month, in December. It's not going to be any quieter. So,
No, no. I hear ya.
but yeah, I'm excited to do this. I was going to recommend a book too. I've got if you like Bradbury and dinosaurs, if you can find his short story collection called Dinosaur Tales. I don't know if it's this. It's mostly just a combination of some of his dinosaur stories all combined into one volume. I don't think there's anything when it was published there was anything new, but it just kind of puts them all in one. There's a couple of classics in there, and then I've got the what is that? The Stories of Ray Bradbury.
Nice.
It's the Everyman's Library. There's I think 100 stories in there, and I'm thinking of maybe just following the stories in that book, maybe something different, but
That'd be cool. Yeah.
just so I'm terrible at making decisions, so I just thought, okay, we'll just start following the stories in this book, and we might do that. But um, I just wanted to kind of get a couple of videos out this month, and then one next month, and then get through the craziness of the end of the year and
There you go.
really hit it. So, all right. Well, Josh, again, thank you. Everyone, subscribe to his channel. It's a great channel if you like classic sci-fi. I've already read one of his recommendations, Martians Go Home. That was great.
It's one of my all-time favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't
Yeah.
read that.
Frederick Brown.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So, all right, Josh. Well, you take care.
All right. Thanks a lot.